In January of 1985, a 30-year-old man from Buenos Aires quit his job, took $300 and one black motorcycle, and rode out of the city without really knowing where he was going. He would not come home for 10 years. The rider was Emilio Scotto, and the loaded black 1980 Honda Goldwing underneath him was a bike he called the Black Princess. By the time he finally rolled back into Argentina in April of 1995, he had crossed more than 200 countries and territories and put 457,000 miles on the odometer. That is nearly the distance to the moon and back, ridden on ordinary roads, 1 mile at a time. Along the way, he wore out 86 tires. He went through 12 batteries. He replaced the seat 9 times. The engine, he changed once. In 457,000 miles. Scotto thought so little of it that he named his whole book about the trip The Longest Ride, a 10-year, 500,000-mile motorcycle journey, and the motor barely gets a mention. Here is the part that should not make sense. A Goldwing crossing the planet on just one engine change is not a freak accident. There are documented Goldwings that have covered more than 300,000 miles on the engine they left the factory with, and a handful of motorcycles whose total mileage has crossed 1 million, though that does not mean a single engine survived the whole way. Numbers like these are astonishing in any motorcycle, where hardly anyone ever rides far enough to find out where the limit even is. So what did the Japanese understand that the rest of the world did not? The answer is not one clever trick, and it is stranger and better than the myth. Part of it is that in the machines built to go the distance, Japanese engineers were happy to leave horsepower on the table, but that choice only pays off because it sits on top of something much bigger. The most relentless quality and testing operation the motorcycle world had ever seen. 2 halves, and you need both. Let me show you the first one and then the part almost nobody talks about. And the single most famous long-lived engine any of them ever built did not go into a Goldwing at all. It went into this. A tiny step-through called the Honda Super Cub, a little red and white commuter bike with an engine measuring 50 cubic centimeters that you could almost hide behind your hand. That engine is the reason we can even have this conversation. Since 1958, Honda has built well over 100 million Super Cubs. The company watched the 100 millionth one roll off the line at its Kumamoto factory in Japan on the 19th of October, 2017, 59 years after the first. No car comes close. Toyota's Corolla, the best-selling car in history, passed 50 million around 2021. The Volkswagen Beetle managed about 21 million. The Ford Model T, the machine that supposedly put the world on wheels, did around 15 million. The Super Cub has outsold all 3 of them combined, and most people have never heard its name. And here is what those 100 million machines taught the world. Used for everything from parcel deliveries to farm work, often in punishing conditions and in places where careful maintenance was a luxury, the Super Cub earned an extraordinary reputation for toughness. There are Super Cubs still putting along today that are older than the people riding them. The bike became a legend, and speed had nothing to do with it. These little engines just kept running. And that reputation helped Honda enormously, but its famous American campaign was selling something broader than reliability. When Honda arrived in the United States in the early 1960s with the slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," it was quietly rebuilding the whole image of motorcycling. Not outlaws in leather, but students, families, ordinary people running an errand. It told millions who had never once considered a motorcycle that this was friendly, clean, everyday transport. That change in image, as much as the engineering underneath it, is what cracked the Western market wide open. Now take that same care and pour it into a full-size touring engine and you get the Goldwing. There is no official mileage at which a Goldwing is supposed to die, and the internet myths run wild. But the documented cases are enough on their own. We will meet a 1975 Goldwing later whose original engine ran 382,000 miles before it was ever replaced. For a machine most riders trade in long before 100,000, that is a completely different category of durability. So this is not one lucky bike. It is a pattern stamped across everything these four companies build, from the smallest commuter to the biggest tourer. Which brings us back to the real question: how? What is actually going on that lets these engines shrug off distances that finish off almost everything else? The first half of the answer starts with a decision that sounds completely backwards. Look at a modern Honda called the CB1100. It is a big, handsome, air-cooled four-cylinder machine, the kind of bike that looks like it belongs in 1980 in the best possible way. Under that classic bodywork sits a 1,140 cubic centimeter engine. And here is the interesting part. Honda deliberately chose not to chase big horsepower with it. An engine that size could easily make well over 100 horsepower, and plenty of rivals pull exactly that out of similar displacement. The CB1100 makes around 88 to 90, and the designer who led the project was blunt about why. Had the goal been horsepower, he said, there would have been no problem making it. There were simply things they cared about more. They wanted a relaxed, torque-rich, air-cooled character, the feel of an old air-cooled 4, and for that, a big peak power number was beside the point. Now, Honda did not detune the CB1100 to make it last longer. They did it for character. But a happy side effect comes along for the ride. An engine asked to make less than it could, ridden the relaxed way it invites, tends to run with more margin left in it. There is a cushion between what it is capable of and what it is ever actually asked to do. And in the bikes designed around that cushion, from the Super Cub to the big tourers, that margin is one real ingredient in why they go so far. It is tempting to turn that into a simple rule. Take the horsepower, divide it by the size, and read off how hard the engine is working. But specific output is only a clue, not a wear meter. What actually decides how long an engine lives is how that power gets made. The revs, the pressure inside the cylinder, the heat, the load on every bearing, the strength of the oil film, and how precisely the whole thing was built in the first place. Leaving power on the table helps. It is nowhere near the whole story. Still, one piece of that puzzle is easy to feel, so start there. Picture two runners. One is a sprinter, flat out, lungs burning, everything at the red line for a few glorious seconds. The other is out for an easy morning jog, breathing through the nose, barely sweating, able to keep going for hours. Both are moving. Only one of them is still at it when the sun goes down. A lot of Japanese touring engines were built to be the jogger. And it is not only a Honda idea. Look at a Kawasaki Vulcan 900, a middleweight cruiser with a 903 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin tuned right around low-down torque, making its strongest pull at about 3,500 revolutions per minute. An engine set up like that spends its normal life turning slowly. Whether Kawasaki did it with longevity in mind, they have never said, so I will not put words in their mouth. What is simply true is that a slow-turning engine is an engine under less strain, and that points at the one number underneath all of this that genuinely drives wear. Every engine works by throwing a piston up and down inside a cylinder, hundreds of times every second when you are riding. It has to stop dead at the top, reverse, and rocket back down over and over. And every reversal is a jolt of stress on the rings, the rod, the bearings, the cylinder walls. The faster that piston is moving on average, the harder its whole life becomes. Engineers watch this closely when they design for a long service life, because past a point, the only way to keep a fast piston alive is exotic, expensive materials, and even those eventually wear. Now, piston speed is not the only thing that can kill an engine. Cylinder pressure, heat, detonation, bearing loads, the valvetrain, any of them can be the limit first, and any honest engineer will tell you durability is a balance of all of them at once. But piston speed is one of the biggest levers you can pull. So if you want a piston to live a long, quiet life, you design the engine to make its power low in the rev range, and you cap how high it is allowed to spin. A Goldwing is not trying to rev to the moon. It makes its effortless torque down low, hauls a heavy bike and two people up a mountain pass without straining, and rarely asks its pistons to move fast enough to hurt themselves. A sport bike is built for the exact opposite. Its power lives high up, so its pistons fly and run hard near the red line for long enough they pile up far more stress cycles than a tourer covering the same road miles at 3,000 revolutions per minute. Ridden gently and looked after, a modern Japanese superbike is not fragile at all, but the touring engine was designed from the first sketch to loaf, and a loafing engine, all else equal, simply has an easier life. Now here is where the popular story about these engines goes badly wrong. People love to say the secret is simplicity. No radiator, no electronics, nothing to break. And for some of these bikes, that is genuinely part of it. An air-cooled Super Cub has no cooling system to fail, no hose to burst on a hot day, no water pump to seize. You cannot break a part that was never fitted. But simpler is not automatically tougher, and the proof is the very bike we keep coming back to. The Goldwing is not simple, and it never was. That original 1975 machine was liquid-cooled, with a radiator and a water pump, built around a flat-4 engine that was one of the most sophisticated things on two wheels at the time. The modern one is liquid-cooled too, with a flat-6 shaft drive, electronic rider aids, and on some models, an airbag. It is one of the most complicated motorcycles you can buy. It is also one of the longest lived. Simplicity did not do that. So the real Japanese lesson was never just keep it simple. It was closer to this. Do not add complexity you cannot make dependable. A Super Cub reaches reliability by leaving things out. A Goldwing reaches the same reliability while carrying nearly everything in, because every one of those systems was engineered and tested until it could be trusted. And that liquid cooling is not a hole in the story either. A radiator and a water pump are more parts to go wrong, yes, but they also hold the engine at a steady temperature. And steady temperature is one of the quiet secrets of an engine that lasts a very long time. You can see the same thinking down in the details. A chain has to be cleaned, oiled, tightened, and eventually replaced, and it will wear out or snap if you neglect it. So the Goldwing runs a sealed shaft drive instead. It is not maintenance-free, it has its own oil in the final drive that needs changing every few years, but the constant chain fuss is simply gone. And the engine itself asks for shockingly little. On the Goldwings built from 2001 to 2017, Honda called for a valve clearance check only every 32,000 miles. When the redesigned engine arrived in 2018, that came down to 24,000. The oil goes in roughly every 8,000. And when owners finally pull the covers at those big intervals, many report finding little or nothing that needs adjusting. The engineering did the hard work up front so the rider would not have to. Which brings us to the second half of the answer, the part almost nobody puts in a video like this, because leaving power on the table and choosing a clever layout only gets you so far. The thing that truly made Japanese engines legendary is far less glamorous. It is the factory behind them. From very early on, these companies built quality in on purpose, as a system. Honda was hammering its engines on brutal endurance runs back in the 1950s, testing prototypes until they broke, tearing down the failures to learn from them, tightening the tolerances its parts were held to, and leaning on the suppliers who made them. Every warranty claim became a piece of data. Every piece of data fed back into next year's design. It is slow, unglamorous, expensive work, and it is the real reason a Japanese engine from the 1970s would start every single morning while a rival sat leaking oil on the garage floor. Which is exactly what one Goldwing proved beyond any argument. Alan Zart bought a 1975 Honda GL1000 when he was a young man, and then he simply never stopped riding it. Across all 48 contiguous states, up into Canada, decade after decade. And on the 29th of July, 2017, the odometer rolled over to 1 million miles. 1 million. It is very likely the highest mileage bike of its kind anywhere on Earth. But here is the honest part, in Zahart's own words. To reach 1 million miles, he was on his 4th engine. The original motor, though, is the real headline. It ran an astonishing 382,000 miles, and along the way, he opened it up exactly once, replacing the bearings and the rings while keeping the original pistons. Sit with that for a second. One engine, more than 1/3 of a million miles, still on the pistons it was born with. That is what these engines actually are. They are not immortal, because nothing spinning that fast for that long could be. They are built with enough margin to run far past normal, simple enough where it counts to repair rather than bin, and made to such a consistent standard that parts and know-how are everywhere. A million miles is not one unbreakable engine. It is a genuinely durable motorcycle, a few engines across its life, a great deal of maintenance, and an owner who kept rebuilding instead of walking away. If you are enjoying this, take a second to subscribe. This channel is all about how a handful of Japanese companies quietly took over the motorcycle world, and there is a lot more of that story coming. Now let me show you how those two halves, the engineering and the factory, actually toppled an entire industry. One myth to clear up first. People imagine the Japanese won by playing it safe, never taking a risk, just quietly polishing the same old thing. That is not what happened at all. These were some of the boldest engineers on the planet. They built screaming Grand Prix engines, the first mass-market 4-cylinder superbike, turbocharged bikes in the early 1980s, and eventually airbags and dual-clutch gearboxes. They chased radical technology constantly. The difference was what they did after the bold idea. They tested and refined it relentlessly until it was dependable instead of shipping it and hoping. And here is the uncomfortable part if you know the history. Almost none of the recipe was secret. Conservative tuning where it fit, careful cooling, obsessive testing, tight manufacturing, patient year-over-year improvement. It was all sitting out in the open. On the other side of the world sat proud, brilliant companies. British names like Triumph and Norton and BSA, the American giant Harley-Davidson. They could have built the same way. Mostly, they did not. But it was not simply that the British loved character, while the Japanese loved reliability. When people actually studied why the British industry collapsed, the answer turned out to be money and management as much as engineering. Years of underinvestment, factories too small and too old to match Japanese scale, slow product development, bosses chasing this year's profit instead of next decade's tooling. The oil leaks were a symptom. The real disease was a business that would not modernize while 4 rivals outbuilt it, out-tested it, and outsold it on every front at once. Harley very nearly went under in the same years, and its lowest point was quality. Through the 1970s, its bikes earned a hard reputation for leaking and breaking. And here is the telling part. Harley pulled through by learning the exact lesson the Japanese were teaching. In 1984, it launched an all-new engine and rebuilt its manufacturing quality from the floor up. And that, far more than any advertising, is what saved the company. Reliability, it turned out, was something every serious motorcycle company was going to have to master, and Harley figured that out just before it ran out of time. So the whole thing came down to a long list of unglamorous habits. Picking the right engine for the job, keeping heat and stress under control, building it to a standard nobody else could hold, testing it until it screamed, learning from every single failure, and then doing all of that again the next year and the year after. For decades. None of it was glamorous, and none of it was free. It took test tracks and tooling and armies of engineers and enormous patience. But that patience is exactly what carried 4 Japanese companies all the way around the world, which is exactly where we started. That black Goldwing, the one Emilio Scotto rode through more than 200 countries and nearly 500,000 miles, did not survive on some single magic trick, and it certainly did not survive on being simple. That 1980 machine was a liquid-cooled, shaft-drive, fully dressed tourer, a genuinely complex piece of engineering. It went the distance because that complexity was done right. Moderate engine speeds, steady temperatures, strong and honest design, precise building, and the accumulated lessons of millions of machines that came before it. And when the original engine finally wore out, somewhere far out on the other side of the planet, the rest of the bike was good enough that a fresh one simply carried it home. Soichiro Honda, the self-taught mechanic who started his company in a wooden shack in a bombed-out country with little more than a workshop and an idea, understood something the rest of the world took far too long to learn. The most powerful thing an engine can do is refuse to quit. And that idea is exactly what lifted four companies with almost nothing in common. One that began building weaving looms, one that built pianos, one that built ships, and one that started as a tiny post-war engine workshop, all the way to the top of the motorcycle world. But how they actually pulled off that takeover, factory by factory, name by fallen name, is a story all its own.